Hello, hello. You are listening to The Long Game, and I'm David Lee Kim, co-founder of Omniscient Digital. In this Kitchen Side episode, I'm joined by my co-founders, Alex and Ali, and we talk about the concept of focusing on the inputs. I've been in a lot of conversations where everyone's too focused on the outcome, usually something negative like not hitting a number, maybe traffic slower than you expected. And rather than asking, why didn't we hit the number? I find that it's much more helpful to align on the inputs and work from there to figure out what the issue is. Because then you can ask, why didn't this thing we did that we all agreed to do, why didn't it contribute to hitting the number like we expected? This, in my experience, allows for a much more productive conversation than just asking, why didn't we hit this number? We also talk about a framework that Alex came up with for communicating the vision for organic growth and SEO, which typically follows 3 stages. First is foundation building until you get to the second stage, escape velocity, and then you get to expansion. This is a helpful tool for communicating the bigger picture and roadmap of the SEO program to leadership. As always, we landed on some pretty interesting insights and hope they help you as well. Here is this week's Kitchen Side.
You ever too busy doing the work to talk about doing the work?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I feel right now.
Yeah, that's what I feel like.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that I experienced when I was in-house, and also something I continue to experience with clients sometimes is where we have a defined strategy at the beginning of our work together, or like we had a project that we agreed, yes, this is an opportunity that we want to explore and we want to do it. We do it for a month or 2, maybe 3 months, and the outcomes just aren't what we expected. So in some cases, we have a hypothesis for how we approach SEO for a client, or maybe it's an internal project. You do it and you're in progress, but you're not seeing signals that this was the right thing to do. And the questions ends up being like, what's the issue? Like, why are the numbers not moving in the way we wanted? And so there's a lot of focus on, hey, the traffic's not where we wanted it or what we expected it to be, or the conversions or leads aren't where we had hoped they would be. And there's a really big focus on that, but that's not actionable. It's like, why number go down? And so what I'm trying to introduce as a framework to some conversations is, let's start from the beginning. When we started on this project, we had agreed on a strategy. We had agreed on a roadmap. We got approval and sign off. Can we agree that all the inputs we were fully aligned on, and this is what we agreed to do together? Because we thought that this was the best path to success. It's like, yes, okay. If we can start there, then we can get into more of the diagnostics around like, okay, we agreed these were the right things. Now let's dig into, okay, if it's traffic or conversions are down, the thought process that I've been following, and I think this should become a blog post at some point, is like, what is causing that? Where's it coming from? Like, which is it, impressions or clicks that went down? If it's impressions that went down, maybe you lost rankings. If clicks are down, but impressions are still flat or up, maybe it's click-through rate. And we start digging into like, well, why is that? Is it AI overviews? Are the SERPs changing where for some reason you're just not getting more clicks? And so it's kind of peeling the onion. I hate that phrase, but peeling the onion and figuring out, trying to isolate like, okay, it's not this. Okay, it's not this. Okay, it's not this. And then eventually landing a point of, it might be these 2 or 3 things. Let's start from there and see how we can validate which one it is, or we may not have 100% certainty, but we can at least say that it's not these things, so we have a better starting point.
This is a meaty area.
And you're having this conversation with the clients or after you do the analysis?
Yeah, we're having...
How are you interacting with the clients at this stage?
Well, we got to alignment that we were doing the right things that we agreed on. I think the big picture that I'm trying to get at here is, especially if you're an SEO who has to honestly give some of this bad news, or like in whatever marketing role that you might be in, it's starting with, like, can we agree we're on the same page of, we did the right things? Now let's actually dig into, why didn't the outcome align with what we had hoped for or expected? So I think starting with the right inputs is good, because if you can't agree that the inputs are correct, then that causes a really unproductive conversation, I think. Because I think unless if that's explicitly stated, there might be an implication that we didn't do the right things. If you didn't do the right things, then I think that's worth having a conversation about, like, where were we misaligned on like the inputs.
So in this context, the word right or the word correct is more in reference to what you were mutually agree, like what you all mutually agreed upon at the beginning of the project.
Yes.
Because in some regard, it wouldn't necessarily be the right things if it's not necessarily driving the desired outcomes. But in the context of our project, it was the correct things in that this is what we signed an agreement to do.
Yeah.
Now we're reevaluating because it's not moving in the direction that we thought it would, or we had an educated guess that it would.
That was what I was going to dig into, is like, how do you know the right things are the right things? Because they're all a hypothesis in the sense that, like, do you know what resulting is?
No.
Resulting
is evaluating the quality of a decision based on the outcome, which is actually a logical fallacy. So it comes from poker, I believe, where poker, right, you've got a hand you're dealt, and then you've got more cards that come up, and you don't know what those cards are. So you're operating under conditions of uncertainty with, this is Texas Hold'em, right, where you've got the cards in the middle and everybody shares that set of cards. And you also don't know what other people have in their hands because everybody's keeping those close to the chest. So all you can do is take the information that you have, which is the two cards that you're given, and make decisions based on that. And then with each subsequent card, you get more information, so more certainty. And then you can sort of implicitly guess based on people's reactions and their behavior, which is more qualitative. But your decision doesn't necessarily equate to a positive outcome because there's still uncertainty. And if you had 100% certainty, which is essentially repeated iterations of the same cards across 1,000 or 1,000,000 versions of that game, then you could say 67% of the time, this card and this card is a winning hand. And that's how you make the decision if it's good or bad to fold or bet, etc. But you can't base the outcome, you can't base the quality of the decision on the outcome because there's luck. There's a whole bunch of factors that you can't control. So if you have two kings, right, that's a good decision to keep and keep betting. And you could still lose if you have two kings because then somebody else could have a straight flush. But it's still a good decision to stay in the hand if you have two kings. And it's usually a bad decision if you have like a mismatched pair of like a 2 and a 5 or something like that. So that's kind of a broad theoretical example. But the question is, like, because the outcomes, right, if you had perfect certainty in the outcomes, you could actually say whether or not that was a good decision to stay in or not. And you can do that in poker because you can mathematically work that out. So how do you know that an SEO decision is right or wrong based on the outcomes? The outcomes very, like, the feedback is very delayed.
Yeah, I love how you have a framework to communicate things that I don't have words for. It makes me feel better. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at, where I think a lot of discussions, at least from my experience, they end up being about, like, well, let's dig into the data and find out what might be happening, which you should do eventually. But what I'm finding is really helpful to ground the conversation is, we propose this thing for this project. Do we agree that these were the inputs that, based on the context we had at the time, was what we should do in order to get to that goal? If we can agree on that, cool. But if we disagree, then there was misalignment from the beginning, and that's worth addressing. And if we agree those were our right inputs, now let's dig into the data and say, okay, these were actually the issues. But if there was misalignment on what the inputs should be or what the decision to do should be, then someone must have had, like, not shared some context or not said something upfront about what should be done. And that's actually the root cause. Like, oh, we didn't know that you wanted to go after this particular persona for some reason. Like, it's in none of the documentation. Why is this being brought up now?
It kind of goes back to, like, we always talk about experiments because I always bring it up. But you need to properly define the conditions of the experiment and your intended outcome. And then if your intended outcome is not what actually happens, then you kind of learn from that and figure out maybe why. And some of it's just luck or, like, externally, circumstances you can't control. But sometimes it was a poorly designed experiment. And it's deciding that in this case, if you're targeting the wrong ICP or that wasn't agreed upon or, like, that wasn't clear, then it's a poorly designed experiment because your outcome can't actually be judged by what you were trying to,
by
your hypothesis, which is, like, we're going to write 10 articles targeted at this persona, targeting this topic line. And then all of a sudden, that's actually not what we're judging it on. So it's actually, I mean, you can't judge the decision based on the outcome in that context.
Yeah. And if any clients are listening, this is not a real scenario. Like maybe some of this stuff is real, but the details are not actually what's happening.
Yeah. But if you did define that up front and you're not getting results, like obviously I think that warrants the question, why not?
Yes.
And like, how long do you have patience before you say, actually, our approach was wrong and we should pivot our approach? Because I think that's a completely valid thing to do instead of I don't think Einstein actually said this, but like try the same thing over and over and expect different results is the definition of insanity. Like you can't just say, all right, we're doing what we were told, we're doing what we agreed upon. We haven't had results for a year, even leading indicators. Like, why would you continue down that path? Like you've got to start thinking some of the inputs are not right, whether it's content quality, links, falling traffic in your space overall, whatever the thing is, something's not working.
Yeah. And I think this is a skill that a lot of people, regardless of whatever career path they're down, should be learning, is how to have that higher level conversation around decision making rather than just the outcomes, because that lends itself more to, I guess, the qualitative side of all our work around like, and this somehow always comes up, but like, how do we make sure we're making good decisions? Like, are all the inputs and all the decisions up front correct? And then like, I think the mistake that one might make if we're not as experienced is to jump straight into the numbers and be like, oh yeah, this algo change happened and that's what's impacting us, which might play a role in things, but it might miss the context at a high level of were these the right inputs and like did we actually make the right decision to invest in this program?
Yeah. I think the other thing that we alluded to is like the feedback window when you judge those decisions and when you decide to pivot or iterate is very important. That's why I loved A/B testing. It's actually really hard to run an agency for me because I'm so used to like instant feedback and data cycles where I can rapidly iterate. And like with an agency,
moving fast,
dude, it's like, I mean, for our clients, like SEO, you actually can do, you can set parameters on feedback windows. You don't have to wait a year to understand if something's working, actually. I mean, to drive like significant compound revenue results does take a long time.
Yeah.
But you definitely see leading indicators within a few months and sometimes a few weeks, depending on the client. But with running an agency and like us doing our own sort of lead generation and marketing, it's been very challenging for me because back in the day when I was running A/B tests, you got a 4-week window. If you have a lot of traffic, sometimes a 2-week window where you set up an experiment, you have a control and a variant, and you can actually statistically analyze which one worked. And then you can move forward with a decision based on that. You've got like a very low threshold of uncertainty. Whereas like for us, for our own marketing, we're like, all right, going to conferences is probably important. And I don't know if I'm going to tell whether it was important next week or in 2.5 years, but I think it is.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind for me, David, talking about like the right inputs is I think it's possible to have had the right, to mutually agree upon the right tactics or inputs and at a certain time period have come to the conclusion that they no longer are.
Yeah.
And I think that is also a struggle that we face in something, talking about building skills and careers, being able to, move as fast as you can, being a few degrees removed from the nucleus of a company, right? And we do our very best to stay intertwined with large business decisions. We have many touch points with our clients to check in on, any positioning changes, rebranding, product updates, anything that might have a domino effect down the line to what we're doing. And I think we've also seen leadership changes. We've seen, business shifts. So what comes to mind for me, the time period of kind of the check-in period you're talking about, Alex, with experiments, I think that, we always are doing that. On a larger scale, we're doing it every quarter or so. It's how quickly we roll out our roadmaps. But I do think our team does their best to check in on larger scale changes on a biweekly basis. And I also think that's a skill we're continuing to hone is if you see a signal or hear explicitly that something is changing that might like domino down all the way down to the content we're producing, we have to shift fast. Like, how do we shift fast? How do we make a judgment call on not necessarily changing the scope, right? Not like the number of pieces or what we're doing, but how we're doing it and tactically what that looks like, so that we don't fall behind and 6 months later realize, sure, we agreed on this on Jan 1, but July 1, the landscape is different. And now we have to almost react too late. But yeah, running an agency, being even though we're strategic partners, being a third party, it's hard to shift quickly. It's like you have to turn around a ship versus just being able to like pivot quick. I think that's where we had the benefit of being in-house versus external.
Yeah, I do miss just the throwback of talking about being in-house, of running like 5 experiments at any given time on different parts of the product and getting that dopamine hit when something hits,
yeah.
something works. And I'm like, oh yes, statistical significance. Let's roll it out. Harder to make those kind of decisions now.
But those are such small decisions though too. I mean,
yeah.
If you really think about it, like in terms of like steering a bigger ship, like if you're going to completely pivot your business model, that's a pretty massive change that large companies almost never do. And like in our context, we were at like say HubSpot or Workato. And to be honest, like what we're experimenting on is like not that impactful. Probably it's like small changes in the user interface. So like if you do make a bad decision, it's not like going to tank the business. And that is why like maybe the feedback window is shorter. It's cheaper to run those experiments, and the value builds up over the program over time. Like any individual experiment's not going to make or break it. It's sort of running 100 experiments and 10 of those, win to basically pay for the program. I miss back at like the startup days, like Pep was very fast at like actually pivoting business decisions. That's something that you don't see that often anymore. It's like somebody who's like, holy shit, I have this new opportunity. Let's like build a landing page for it. See if we have offer and demand, like alignment, and like pour resources into this now. Like I love that style of like, I see this opportunity. Let's go after it right now.
What's this, Alex, talk about showing a path to category leadership. Sounds like you've been thinking about that a bit.
Yeah, that's the newsletter that I'm writing. And the idea came to me because I've had a few clients, and actually one that I'm not directly working with. We just did like a feedback call. And he's like, hey, like they're very early stage, first off, to set the context. We've got an agreement to build out sort of the foundations. We've got expectations set. It's very clear, like you're not going to see like wild results month 3 because you're in a competitive space and you're just building it out. So he's very happy. He's like the keyword, the roadmap's excellent. Like the topics are great. The work's been really good so far. One thing I'm curious though, is we have these pretty big ambitious goals for like user signups over the course of this year, next year. And I'm trying to mathematically work it out. Like based on what you've given us, I can't really see the path towards those bigger goals. I understand what we're doing right now and the importance of it. Basically, he's like, show me the next step. Because he's like, if we need to increase budget, if we need to hire additional resources on our side, hire a different agency, like, whatever it takes to get to this point, can you show me the path? And I'm like, all right, that's very interesting, because there's sort of two sides of the spectrum that seem dichotomous: expectation setting and saying like, hey, you're not going to see the moon. We can't like get you to the moon month 1. But also knowing that exists, knowing the grand ambitious plan kind of sets the course. It gives you the ability to say, all right, this is horizon 1. What are the signals that we need to say, all right, it's time to amp it up for horizon 2? And what does horizon 3 look like? What is the plan to get to the presidency? Like, do I need to become a senator first? Do I need to like go to law school? Like, I can't just get there. Like, I'm not going to get that next month. I'm not going to be a black belt in jiu-jitsu if I just show up to class for a week. But if I start going to class and do the foundations, suddenly I start thinking, what should I be doing to get to the next level? Like, should I also be doing cross-training? Should I be watching a YouTube video? Should I do private classes? Like, what are the additional things that I can do to if I want to, if that's my ambition, to get to leadership status? Because I think ultimately, and I said this before, maybe we started like the recording itself, but I've been thinking about SEO program building in 3 phases. It's like, in the early days, your expectation should be building the foundations and making your site and your content portfolio competitive. Because before then, the incumbents are very difficult to beat. That's why everybody's jaded. They're like, it's a rigged game, blah, 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 blah. You need a good content portfolio, topical expertise, website authority. And then you hit this phase where you're suddenly ranking. You're hitting page one. You publish a page, and in 2 weeks, it's on page one, right? Like, you're starting to see the signals. The next phase goes to expansion, scale. Now you're starting to compete. You're starting to drive more traffic. You're starting to take propitious keywords from competitors, high intent stuff, like really valuable stuff. You're starting to convert. You're starting to optimize old content for conversions, and you're really starting to make money. Eventually, there comes a point, though, where the truly ambitious brands, and some of them we've worked with, want to dominate the category. They basically want leadership status. What does that mean? What does that mean from a technical standpoint? What does that mean from a content standpoint? What does that mean from an off-page SEO standpoint? How do I hit 10 out of 10? How do I be the number one player, beating out all the others? And that's kind of the mental model that I've got going. And so sort of showing that while also working in phase one is kind of an interesting dichotomy, you know?
Yeah, it reminds me of when I was in product management. We had kind of two forms of roadmaps. One was, hey, what are the engineering sprints for the next couple of weeks or months? And then there was a larger roadmap of how does this fit into the bigger business goals, and like, what's the bet we're taking, and what's this going to look like in a year or two? And there's always a balance of making sure that things were getting done day to day, but also being able to communicate to leadership like, hey, I'm pitching this program because here's where it should be in 2 years and how it's going to contribute to the business. And with each, I guess, sub roadmap, we're saying, hey, this is the progress we're making on the larger roadmap to get to here. Like, we're currently here on this larger roadmap. But that's what I'm hearing, how I'm interpreting what you're saying, Alex, of sure, we might have these roadmaps for what we're doing for the next 3 months, but how do we continue to paint the picture of, hey, here's what we're working toward in a bigger picture? Like, it's not just producing content or doing SEO stuff. It's contributing to business goals and growing the business. So how does this all ladder up to those things in the long term? Maybe it's not happening now, but we should see progress there and know what we're working toward.
Yeah, I actually have a good reference for this. I was just listening to a podcast this morning with Cal Newport. He was on Noah Kagan's podcast, and he talked about multi-scalar planning. So I don't do this. He does this, but he plans out his decades. And then below that level, he plans out his years. And then below that level, he plans out his quarters. And below that level, he plans out his weeks, etc.
I thought 5-year planning was a lot.
I mean, yeah, I don't plan out like 2 years from now. But I like this in the context of marketing investments, maybe not life. I'm a little bit more flowy in that context. But marketing programs, product programs should be teleological, meaning they work towards an end state. Because otherwise what you're doing is like every week, every month. I mean, like, the smaller the increment, the more willy-nilly you get with regards to the focus. And ideally, especially with SEO, things compound and build on top of each other. So what is week one building on? What is month one building on? What are we building towards through all of this? And if you can answer that question, it gives you a lot more clarity as to what you should do step 1, step 2, and step 3.
How would someone in phase one account for the variability that would happen across organic search by the time they get to stage 3?
You can't really do much about it. I mean, unless you can predict the future. So that's kind of the point of David and I. We did the podcast last time when you were on holiday about analytical thinking.
It was the most David and Alex podcast we would have. And we're like, this would be what we talk about.
I was like, I don't know.
It was real dorky. Nerds. Well,
because you have a longer roadmap, right? Like, you're showing this client, here's where we're going. Here's like, as much as I can show you without, obviously you can't predict the future. Here's what the path looks like. What are the touch points, or not the touch points? What are the milestones where you pause and check like your surroundings and say, are we still moving in the right direction? Because a lot of this is contingent upon competition, right? So that it's relatively relative to what the competitors are doing and generally what direction they're moving, right? That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So what are the milestones where you stop, pause, and make sure that your direction is still the right direction?
I think that's subject to the individual company at hand, as well as like in the life context planning, like the person at hand. But
and
with
those
regards
signals
and
too.
the signals, if anything big changes, if you're like a AI wrapper for Chat GPT, like if you just basically built on top of OpenAI and like they come up with a free tool that does exactly what you do, like, you probably have to think heavily about whether you want to continue investing in that. But to answer your question, like on the variance, you're never going to have 100% certainty. What I think the goal is to say, if everything went well, all we had were green lights, and given the present information that we have, because we can't predict the future, is this goal worth attaining? And can we approximate the cost to attain that goal? And then along the way, things may change, and you may have to like reallocate resources based on those changes. Maybe the overall opportunity in the landscape increases, as is the case with AI. If you did search volume analysis 2 years ago, it's going to be way less than it is now. So maybe that expands. Maybe it contracts, right? Maybe there's like less opportunity to go after search terms in, I don't know. But yeah, the increment that you decide to make those, well, it depends on the scope of the change too. Like, are you completely going to reinvest all of your money from SEO into a different program?
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big decision. You probably shouldn't be making that on a week-to-week basis. That should probably be quarterly, if not yearly. Are you going to make micro decisions based on new competitors popping up? Yeah, you could do that weekly, monthly, quarterly. Like that's that's iterating,
Yeah, that's going to be baked in regardless. Like that should be part of how you build out the 3 stages, right?
Yeah, totally.
Something else that started this conversation, I think, before we started recording is because we had a client come to you say, like, we have all these goals, pretty steep goals. I'd like to understand like what the future looks like. And we've had other clients say, like, here's where we want to be. How do we get there? How fast do we get there? Do you always think it's the right move, if you can control this, to set the goals and then match your program? Or would there ever be a case where you'd want to map out those 3 horizons and then evaluate realistically, or maybe a little bit less realistic, right? We want to shoot for the moon, what those goals would be? Which order would you recommend?
I would take the goal first. And then if the program that we're auditing, which is SEO, doesn't get you there, then we can honestly say it's not going to get you towards your goal. So you're going to need to find another channel to invest in to get to that goal. I don't think you should compromise on what you want because there's almost certainly a way to get there. Otherwise, investors wouldn't have invested in your company.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have started the company. You probably should have done that due diligence to see if there's a market opportunity.
Yeah.
But I don't think you should do maybe bottoms up planning for company goals. Now, for SEO goals, certainly, like you need to find what's feasible.
Yeah.
It's more the latter that I'm referring to, or the business impact coming from your SEO program, directly related.
Yeah, I've done this exercise where they're like, hey, we promised the investors we would get this to this much in revenue. How does SEO contribute to that? So there's a top-down goal, like, all right, top-down, like here's what would need to happen to get there. And then we build up the bottoms-up model. And we're like, oh, we're not going to get anywhere near close to that. And if we did want to get anywhere close to that, we need to invest this much money. And here are the risks of all of that. Like some of it might not work, or like, let's assume like 75% of it, we actually get to 75% of it. And then that leads to the question of, well, is the goal unrealistic, or are there other opportunities we're not exploring? Do we have to like lean more on outbound sales and less on like build like inbound for this year? Like when can the program get to that point where it can contribute that much? So yeah, I agree with Alex. Like sure, there's a threshold for an unreasonable goal, but if you start with a goal and like try to build up to it first and then realize that it's unrealistic, that's better than shooting for a low goal, I think.
There are also external factors that dictate your goals in certain circumstances. So we 3 can actually set our own goals. You can do that in your own life. You can choose what you want to do and what you don't want to do. But if you're running a public company, you have earnings targets that basically map to shareholder value. So you have to backcast from those goals. Similarly, but maybe a little bit more wiggle room is like if you're a startup and you're hoping to raise the next round, there's certain revenue targets that you need to hit and certain growth targets that you need to hit month over month to prove that you're worthy of investing in, so you can grow to the next round and hopefully like get acquired or go public. So there's often pretty hard line metrics that you need to hit from a revenue or user growth standpoint to hit those. With us, with Bootstrap, if you don't have as many external forces guiding you, you can maybe choose a different goal.
Yeah. Or work in both directions to see what's feasible or relatively how much money you'd need to spend.
Do you hear this like hammering in my background?
A little bit.
Okay. Somebody in my apartment building is just like hammering at like 3 p.m. on a Friday, which is so rude.
When's a polite way to be hammering?
After work?
The middle of the night.
Yes.
It's probably the end of their workday.
Yeah. In New York City, 3 p.m. You think people stop working at 3 p.m. here?
People definitely stop working at 3 p.m.
100%
Summer Fridays.
No.
Really?
This is the only city in America that still works.
Maybe
hard.
not in New York. Okay.
Yeah.
They definitely do that in Boston. Like sometimes I'm hanging out, like I'll take Chance for a walk. I'm like, who are all these people just hanging out at the park at 2 p.m. in the afternoon? Don't you work?
Hey, in Chicago, people appreciate their summers. So they take Fridays and live it up because the rest of the year
people in
sucks.
Austin didn't work at all. They just like, they're all content creators or something, all TikTok stars. They just go to Barton Springs every day. Do you ever think about that? Like I have worked remote for a long time. You go to Trader Joe's at like 3 p.m. or something on a Tuesday and you're like, who the hell do these people think they are? Don't they have a job?
I tell myself those are like either they're like night workers or they're like doctors or nurses that work like 3/12s. That's what I tell myself. I'm like, they work hard other days.
Well, life was better before everybody went remote work when we were maybe the few people who did.
Oh yeah.
I liked it better before. I'm just going to say, like, you could get to restaurants easier. You could go to the gym at any time and it would be awesome. Now everybody's like free for all.
Yeah, I don't know that life. I was in office every single day. I hated working
from home. You were in
the office. The other day I was walking by a group. It was like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, not a Friday. It was like a Tuesday. And they were talking about like, yeah, sometimes I just work like an hour a day, you know, I'm sick. I'm just like, oh my God. Like as a business owner, I'm like, oh man. But I'm also
like big company, like just
they're like big company. Yeah.
Quiet quitting type thing.
We just had this conversation, Alex, where what were we talking about? Where we were like, some people try to just like call it in, but like it would make us feel so uncomfortable because like we're not doing anything.
They join like a mega corporation and just basically retire. They're basically just like doing 10 hours of real work per week, or if that. Sometimes it's just complete redundancy. But those days, I don't know. I feel like that was a certain era that was more common. Nowadays, it's probably harder to do that. Also, yeah, Allie, you and I talked about that and like how you'd kind of feel dead inside. Like if you did that, it's like,
I don't know if this is commentary to how closely tied my identity is to my work, which is something to be examined after this, but I just need purpose. I just don't think I would feel good about not either continuing to challenge myself or having some sort of purpose.
I genuinely don't think it's anything to be evaluated or ashamed of unless it's like to the extreme end where like your self-esteem takes a hit if you like don't close a deal or something like that. But no, I actually think humans need something to occupy their time and something to say, this is like what I'm doing while I'm on Earth. And you could obviously get that through non-work ways, but like I don't think the natural state is not to just like float and like phone it in. Like I think there's a certain fraud that maybe a feeling of fraud that comes from that too. You know what I mean? I
feel like you'd probably feel a different type of burnout. You'd still be burnt out. It would just be different.
Yeah. And I mean, this all comes back to Sisyphus. He had a purpose. He was applying himself to that rock.
Imagine Sisyphus happy. I have a friend. I won't mention his name because it's pretty personal stuff. He just got laid off, and the past 6 months or 8 months, he had been pretty much in a malaise, but like a burnout state, and he was underworked. So basically, the business was kind of struggling to get deals. He's in sales, so like he had very few dopamine hits, very little. Maybe I've mentioned this before, but there's a book called Good Reasons for Bad Feelings. And they talk about how depressive states can sometimes signify that you're picking berries from a tree that has not enough berries to be interesting, right? So it makes you kind of pause and reflect and try to find a new tree. And he realized that this state of like malaise and underwork was driving down his overall life quality and self-esteem. Like he felt like he didn't have purpose or motivation. And now he's obviously a little bit sad and like stressed that he's got to go get a new job, but he's so much more excited. He's like, dude, that's what I needed in my life. I needed something that actually got me up in the morning.
That's why people say like growth in any sense. And I would say this also also refers to the 3 stages we just talked about. Like growth is not linear. You know, like I imagine in this program you've mapped out for this client where they're, you know, in stage 1, seeing signals, moving into horizon stage 2, you might take a little bit of a dip. Like it's not going to be this perfect line up and to the right. I mean, ideally it would be, but realistically it's probably not going to be. And I think that also applies to personal changes too. Like it's going to get worse before it gets better kind of thing. And I imagine hopefully his next role is going to be, you know, even better.
Yeah. I do have friends too who one intentionally decided I'm not going to work for a while. And after a couple months of that, they're like, yeah, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Like I feel like I need to use my brain. I want to apply myself to something. And I had another friend who unintentionally did that because they were laid off and they're like, I'm just going to have fun. And they're like, yeah, I'm ready to apply for jobs again. So it kind of always leads to something where they need something to apply themselves to. And some people find that in work. Usman, one of our team members, just wrote a LinkedIn post about that. Like people being shamed for enjoying work. It's like, hey, I like doing this. I like using my brain. And some people find it in their kids or something like something else, which is totally admirable too. Yeah. But just understanding that, you know, it's not just, the goal is not to do nothing with your time.
Or get to a point where you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
If you've tasted it, you know that feeling too. I had it really briefly just going to this wedding recently, and it was like one of those all-inclusive resorts. But I was there for like 5 days, and y'all, we've done this, right? And it's really fun for a while because you do decompress fully. But there is a feeling after a few days that you're like, I can't have another like fruity cocktail. Like it just, my whole sense of time kind of falls apart, and I just feel like I'm blurry brained, and I'm like, I can't focus on anything. And it's not actually like that fun anymore. And I actually felt that way with travel for a while towards the end. Like I was very nomadic through my 20s. And it was a very specific type of travel, mainly through Europe, where I would just be like going to museums and cafes and like clubs and whatever. And after a while, I'm like, this fun is not even fun. It's just like, it's the same old.
Special.
So I think that's like people in retirement get that all the time. They're like, there's only so much golf and like so many like Mai Tais I can drink before I want to actually do something kind of interesting.
Well, it's funny you say that because I'm home right now and I'm spending some time with my parents, and they're like semi-retired. They own their own business, but manage it. My dad just hiked the Camino. So the whole Camino is about 600 miles in 36 days. He averaged like 17 miles a day.
Wow.
And he decided to do it last year. It was like a whole year of training, planning. You had to map it all out. Obviously, it's like quite a bit of time to be away. And I think it gave him a purpose. And he's home. He's like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do now. I got to find my next Camino. Which I think, I mean, the retirement thing definitely is true. And I imagine folks that, you know, sell their business or, you know, don't really have to work. It's like a really unique challenge where you're like, I'm good, I'm set, my family's good, but like, what is my next thing that I'm doing? I know, you know, there's a lot of other things to do, but it's a common issue. Did I freeze?
No.
What?
I didn't know
Did
what else to say.
I didn't know what to say either.
Yeah, it's like, I was trying to maybe come up with some clever way to connect that to the idea that we need progress and roadmaps that reach the end.
Bring this back to SEO.
No.
The Camino is like SEO.
We can call it.
Yeah, let's call it.
Anticlimactic endings.